Hey, what is going on? It is me, SR Mori, and today I wanted to talk about something really cool. If you didn't know, the Batman was just greenlit for a sequel, and so I thought I would go through and finally do what I would like to see in said sequel. So that is what we're going to talk about today. Please leave a like down below and subscribe if at any point during the video you like what I have to say. Yeah, so let's get into it. Why not? The Batman 2, just greenlit that there's going to be a sequel. So here's what they could do and what they should do. Alright, so first and foremost, I want to get out of the way some of the minor villains that will probably show up and or should show up in some capacity. So first and foremost, we need to talk about Penguin and Catwoman. Now, at least Penguin, if not both of them, are going to be getting their own HBO Max series, so I don't think that it is important for them to be super present in the next movie. I think that Penguin will naturally show up because I think his show, from what they described, is going to kind of set him up as the next Falcone. Kind of like, they're describing it like a Scarface movie, but it's Penguin. So I think naturally Penguin would probably show up in the next one, but I think maybe in a minor role or maybe it'll be a big role. I don't know, but I think he will definitely show up. Now, Catwoman, I think she should get a break from interacting with Batman. From what I've heard in interviews is they're going to be taking Catwoman down the road of where when she's in Bloodhaven, she's going to be developing to be more like the Catwoman that we know from the comic books. And so what that means is her and Batman are going to increasingly get less and less along. So Catwoman's going to continue to go down the path of villain. She doesn't have Batman there to kind of guide her so morally. So I think from what the interviews Matt Reeves has said, I think they're going to kind of take it in that direction. So I think it would make sense if we got the Catwoman show and like we kind of see her become Catwoman, and then maybe, I just don't think she should be in the next one. She should be in the third one, but not the next one. But it could happen. It could totally happen. Next is Two-Face. I don't think that you should do Two-Face, that they should do Two-Face probably at all, but at the very least, they should introduce Harvey Dent. The district attorney, Coulson, was killed by the Riddler in the Batman, obviously, so that position is open, and I think it only makes sense that Harvey Dent would take his place. And I think in the sequel, you should introduce Harvey Dent, and he should not turn into Two-Face in the second film. He should be Harvey Dent, but still at the end of the movie. Because Two-Face was done so well in The Dark Knight, I think that you would have such a challenge of making him interesting. And I think one of the ways that you could do him and make him interesting is to keep him Harvey Dent for at least the second movie. If not forever, and just leave Two-Face be where he is. If you do Two-Face, do Two-Face, you should do the green face, not the acid burn flesh muscle like they did in The Dark Knight. You should do something different and unique. They showed with the Joker that they're not afraid of doing skin condition kind of things. And so I think that you could do that with Two-Face and not have it be dorky or kitsch. All right, next, let's talk about villains and plots that possibly could show up and I could actually see them doing it. Specifically the villains, maybe not necessarily the plots that I propose. So first and foremost, we've heard both Matt Reeves and Robert Pattinson separately, one saying that they'd like to do Hush, being Reeves, and Pattinson, and several of the other cast members saying that they want to do The Court of Owls. So I think it stands to reason that maybe they'll show up at some point. However, I think that we should be careful in getting our expectations up with that, because here's the thing. The way I see a lot of people kind of proposing the plot is another serial killer mystery that reveals further corruption in Gotham, which is exactly what we just got in the Batman. I don't think they should do that. It would be way too similar. It would be almost an identical movie, and that's not what you want. It should be similar but completely different. Like, it shouldn't be necessarily as much of a detective mystery. You can have that detective mystery stuff, and I think they should, but it should not be about Gotham City corruption again, like 2 movies in a row, serial killer exposing corruption. It's too similar. It's the same movie, and so it shouldn't happen. As well, something to consider is, although I love The Court of Owls, I'll be honest, I think Hush is way overrated, but The Court of Owls is great, but neither of these are super well known to casual audiences. So if I were to tell my dad, who's a huge Batman fan, but he doesn't read the comic books and he doesn't like get into the TV shows and animated movies, if I told him, oh yeah, The Court of Owls and Hush, like here's this trailer, he'd be like, I don't know who any of these people are. And it wouldn't really grab his attention. So you want to be able to get those casual fans who don't necessarily read the comic books, and they're not going to know who The Court of Owls and who Hush, are. So you want to have one of those colorful villains that dates back to like the Adam West show, or is so prominent, like Bane, where he's not that old, but he's so prominent that people recognize Bane. Only comic book fans are going to recognize Hush and The Court of Owls as of now. That doesn't mean that you can't do them, though, but you have to do them alongside a colorful villain and avoid repeating the exact same plot that we just got. So the other villain that was pretty much, directly addressed was Mr. Freeze. So here, this article from Variety, finding the grounded version of everything, saying that for him, there's a grounded version of Mr. Freeze, him being Matt Reeves. While the director seems proud of how comic book faithful the Batman has turned out, he does not seem puzzled by how to unwind the fantastical and see how you could make sense of, say, Mr. Freeze. In Mr. Freeze's case, were the icy villain ever to be used in a film more like his or Christopher Nolan's, Reeves had to say, I think there's actually a grounded version of that story which could be really powerful and could be really great. Mr. Freeze is really the only villain that Matt Reeves has openly and on his own volition said that he wants to tackle it. He's said that he'd be interested in doing Hush when answering somebody else's question, would you want to do Hush? But Mr. Freeze, he kind of brought up, they asked him, who do you want to do next kind of thing, unwinding that fantastical. He brought up Mr. Freeze on his own. So to me, that makes Mr. Freeze probably the most likely villain to show up in the next movie. But so how do you ground Mr. Freeze? What could Matt Reeves do that would still keep Mr. Freeze, like all the parts of the character that we care about and that we would like to see in a live-action iteration? Obviously, you're going to have to give up some things. You're not going to see this image here in the Batman. You're not going to see that Mr. Freeze, unfortunately. So what can we expect? What could Matt Reeves do? I'm not saying this is what he will do, but it is what he could do. First of all, you have to have Mr. Freeze have a suit. And it can't look like just a hazmat suit. You're going to have to embrace some of the fantastical. You just have to. You already did with Batman's suit. It is like near indestructible bulletproof to the point where he's getting shot by fully automatic rifles at close range and not being knocked down. So like there's already some of the fantastical. If you can be fantastical with the Batman suit, I don't see any reason why you can't be fantastical with Mr. Freeze. So I would suggest that he be a scientist, and he's doing research using cryogenics, And in order to be safe in his lab, he has to wear a certain suit. Should that suit be required for him to live? I don't think so. I think that might be getting a little bit too into the fantastical to expect that. But I think that he'll wear it because it's his suit, right? And he doesn't really need a reason for why he would wear it outside of his job. He's crazy. You know what I mean? But I would like the suit to resemble what you see here. I would really love it if he had the red goggles. And if he doesn't have the helmet, I will be very upset. It has to have the helmet. And I personally would prefer something like what you see here or the animated series, which this is derived from, where it is that shape. It's not like what you see in the Arkham games. I really don't like Mr. Freeze designing the Arkham games, and I don't think you'd ever see something that fantastical in these movies. So for me, he has to have the suit, and so to make that grounded, it should have to somehow be related to his job. It doesn't have to be the scientist job. It can be any job, but he has to have the suit, which would control temperature for him to be able to do his job. And so that's where his suit could come into play. Ice gun. I probably wouldn't expect to see a gun that shoots ice at people. But you could expect how Batman has like his gadgets. You could expect this Freeze to have ice gadgets, like maybe an ice grenade, or when he murders somebody or whatever, he uses dry ice, or he kind of weaponizes cold, but maybe not in the form of using a gun, right? So he'll still use cold and ice as a weapon, but probably not as a gun. He could even have little canisters that will, kind of like, again, like a grenade where when they burst, it freezes or chills people, gives them frostbite. Something like that. His murders could just be ice-related, cold-related. He could have no weapon at all. But he should have some kind of a suit, preferably the closer to the animated series and like this drawing here, the better in my opinion. In terms of story, I think you have to go with the Heart of Ice. In fact, I would even title the movie Heart of Ice, The Batman Heart of Ice. I think that's an excellent title. And you have to have the Nora Freeze. It has to be his wife. Don't do that crap they did in the New 52 where he only thinks it's his wife and he's actually a super weird creepo. Don't do that. Don't screw Mr. Freeze like that. We need that sympathetic aspect of the character. And seriously, though, do the Heart of Ice. Make him a sympathetic villain that ends up not being wholly evil, but is still really bad. Kind of like Riddler. You relate to him and you're like, well, you're not totally wrong, but the methods of which you're going about this are wrong. That's the way Mr. Freeze should be. And it should ask the question of how far is too far in the pursuit of a noble cause? Kind of like the movie Prisoners with Hugh Jackman and Paul Dano and Jake Gyllenhaal. How far is too far to do something noble, right? In that movie, Hugh Jackman's trying to get his kidnapped kids back, and he's straight up torturing Paul Dano's character to get information. So, the question is, how far is too far in pursuit of a noble cause? I think that's a really nice question to pose Batman through the lens of Mr. Freeze. Well, how far is okay for Batman to go, in his mission to save Gotham? How far is it okay for Mr. Freeze to go to save his wife? I think that's a really interesting question that they should ask. This way you can still keep that detective aspect without it being too familiar. And by the way, I should say, I don't think that Mr. Freeze should be the primary villain. And let me explain that. He should be the poster primary villain. But I think there should be a secret main villain, right? So let me continue with that. So if he's not a complete villain, what else? Who else? Should Freeze be alone? No, he shouldn't. I think And it would be pretty excellent because it would combine what Reeves and Pattinson wants to do, weaving the court of owls into the Freeze story. This way you have that ticket, eye-grabbing, casual, fan-grabbing villain in Mr. Freeze, but you're still giving us a villain that hasn't had a silver screen live-action adaptation. And so that's a big deal. That's what we want. So the court is ultimately the ones responsible for Nora and Victor's situation. And so the first chunk of the movie, Batman is pursuing Mr. Freeze and maybe dealing with Penguin and his new racket while he's trying to find out, who's doing these ice-related murders, and he's finding Mr. Freeze. Well, then maybe halfway through the movie, maybe a little bit later, he confronts Freeze and he kind of realizes what's actually going on with Freeze, and that Freeze, the people he's killing, are people that are associated with this Court of Owls. And that's how you kind of introduce the court. And so then you have a Batman, Mr. Freeze team up against the Court of Owls. Personally, that could, if you did that plot, even though Scarecrow is my favorite villain, that would probably be my favorite Batman movie ever. Imagine Mr. Freeze and Batman taking on the Court of Owls, the Talon, all of that. It would be amazing. You could have it be revealed that Freeze was being manipulated by someone, alternate plot line here. And you could have that fill in the blank. It could be Hush that's manipulating him. It could be the court, as I said. It could be Riddler. It could be Joker. It could be Penguin, etc. But I think the strongest version of that is the Court of Owls situation that I posed there. Freeze, as I said, could start out as the main antagonist, but after his and Batman's confrontation, Joker or Riddler or the court or whatever could be kind of revealed to be the ultimate mastermind, or in my example of Joker and Riddler, their plot's completely separate from Joker. But my issue with that last plot is that it could feel too overcrowded. Really, if you're going to do Mr. Freeze, I really like that incorporating the court line in there. And if you're like, well, what about Hush? What about Hush? Like, I'm going to address that later in the video of where you could incorporate him into any of the movies. This one, the third one, whatever one. You could incorporate Hush in any of these. I have a plan for that. Now, if I was going to be casting Mr. Freeze, I've seen this fan cast online, and normally I absolutely hate fan casting because 99% of the time they cast people purely off their appearance and not their acting ability. And I think that Milkinson, if I'm probably butchering his name, but Milkinson, whatever, guy that played Grindelwald in the new movie, I would love to see him as Mr. Freeze. Keep the hair, make him bald, I don't care. I think he would make... I actually like the white hair and how that kind of hit the gray silver hair. It kind of makes him seem a little bit more like Mr. Freeze. You're probably not going to get the blue skin Mr. Freeze. I should point that out as well. Possibilities and ideas. So what you can do with Hush and Clayface if you wanted to. You could blend the two. And so instead of grafting pieces of face to himself, which is really unrealistic if you think about it, you could blend Hush with Clayface, where it's you're kind of grounding Clayface, but you're also kind of grounding Hush by combining the two. Like maybe he's really good at making latex masks that can make him look like other people, and that's kind of your angle. He's Clayface in that he can't literally become clay, but he can change his appearance through, latex masks or clay, prosthetics and stuff. I don't think we're ever going to see Man-Bat or Killer Croc, and I'm okay with that. They're not my favorite villains. I think that Professor Pig, Ventriloquist, Firefly, Mad Hatter, Zaz, Hugo Strange, and other villains of that nature would fit well into a really minor role as like an opener to a movie or in the Arkham HBO Max series. I don't think that they should get their own movie. Really not interested in seeing the League of Assassins. In an ideal world, there would be at least 4 movies, the 4th being this endgame level threat, which involves a lot of different rogues. This could be led by Bane or Joker, doesn't matter. But all the best Batman comic books, if you really think about it, that really stick with people are ones where you have this big villain like Hush or Joker or Bane, and they kind of incorporates a lot of the rogues. Like Batman has to go through multiple rogues before he gets to the big baddie like Hush, Bane, or Joker. And so I think that that's probably, you do 3 movies and then a 4th movie, which is kind of like the penultimate of the series. I think 4 is a reasonable number. I don't think they're going to do 6. They'll probably do 3, but I think 4 is what they should do. So the next question is, what would I do if I was in charge? With all that we've talked about in mind, this is what I would do. And you'll notice that Batman Heart of Ice, I include Mr. Freeze, Hush, and Court of Owls. So this is how I would incorporate Hush into any of the movies. You could cut him out of this and put him into any of these, but this is where I would put him. So Freeze is trying to avenge what happened to him and save his wife, but it leads him to the Court of Owls. As I, told you when we were talking about Mr. Freeze, I really love that plot line. Batman is trying to figure out who's freezing all these people and robbing places with cold-related crimes, while also dealing with Penguin's new criminal empire. Batman and Freeze end up being led to the court and team up against the Talons and the Court of Owls. Meanwhile, there's a small subplot which involves Bruce Wayne and Hush trying to get revenge on Bruce for Thomas Wayne's part in Edward Elliot, Thomas Elliot's father's, murder. So you could fit that into any of the movies, which would help develop Bruce Wayne's character, which I think Robert Pattinson needs desperately. But I don't see why Hush would target Batman unless he knows who Batman is, but he would target Bruce Wayne. And so I think that you could have that as like a subplot, that would be kind of interesting and make the movie feel more layered and fleshed out. Freeze is like Catwoman in that Batman believes them to be evil, and they kind of are, but ends up needing/using them to defeat the real villain, which is the Court of Owls. That's all for today. That's what I would do with the Batman Reeves verse if it was up to me. I would have HBO Max series, spinoffs, just developing this out as much as I possibly could. Have a great week, and peace out.